Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige, and happy primary season. I believe on the day that this comes out, the Texas and Arkansas primaries will be happening the next day. Illinois is right around the corner, and we are officially off to the races. But today we are going back to Illinois. This is officially the final Illinois candidate before primary day, which is super exciting, and it's been so exciting to talk to all these people running for office. But we are going back to statewide office, and we will be interviewing Ridge Knapp, who is running for the State House District 13 seat. And if you live in Illinois, much like me, I don't live in that district, but this race has been all over my social media, which has been super interesting to follow from afar. But, you don't really know what the general kind of gauge of how a race is going to go unless you live in the community. So it's been really interesting to watch from the outside, and talking to Ridge has just been super nice. He's super kind. I would trust him. I would trust him in a state house seat, and I really do think that he is somebody who is meeting the moment, meeting what we need right now. Before we get to the episode, though, a little bit about Ridge. Ridge Knapp is a progressive data analyst, Chicago youth sports coach, and passionate volunteer for organizations and campaigns across our district and state. He has organized students on campuses across Chicago and across the country, worked as a data analyst for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and served as a staffer for Vice President Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Lauren Underwood. Like many members of Gen Z, Ridge started his political journey in high school. His junior year, alongside other members of his high school's Gay Straight Alliance, he contacted his hometown's Republican state senator about a bill to ban so-called conversion therapy. They were shrugged off. It was that show of political apathy and lack of accountability that inspired Ridge to pick up a clipboard and start talking to his neighbors, and he hasn't stopped since. While a student at the University of Chicago, Ridge rose through the ranks of College Democrats of America, mobilizing students across Chicago and across the country to stand up and fight back against the first Trump administration. During the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Ridge stayed in the fight, taking time off from his graduate studies to work on the re-election campaign of U.S. Representative Lauren Underwood as a digital strategist, bringing people together virtually even as the world kept us apart. At the state's attorney's office, he ran the program that shared crime and diversion statistics with elected officials and police chiefs countrywide to counter conservative fear-mongering and keep our communities more aware of the impacts of the criminal justice system. One of his largest projects looked at felony enhancements, felony charges that would otherwise have been misdemeanors, applied disproportionately to undocumented Chicagoans and other immigrants in Little Village, Berwyn, and Cicero, urging the office to reform its charging procedures. Most recently, Ridge served as a senior analyst on the Harris-Walz National Analytics team, where he worked tirelessly against Donald Trump, Senate Republicans, and Project 2025. Although bigotry and fear-mongering took the day, Ridge is endlessly proud of the work he and his team did to defend democracy, and he knows that you can never let a loss, however big, stop you from fighting for the people who need it most. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Ridge Knapp. Ridge, thank you so much for coming on. It is great to have you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's great to finally be in the seat that I'm seeing so many other folks in.
Of course. So you are running in Illinois' 13th House District, State House District,
State House,
which, yes, everybody loves to ignore state politics, but there are some very fascinating people that are running at this point for state office. You have previously worked in policy, organizing, and democratic leadership, including working for Lauren Underwood, who has definitely made a name for herself in Illinois. Mm-hmm. What made you decide that now was the moment to run?
Absolutely. Well, look, as you said, I've spent my whole life working in and around democratic politics and policymaking, whether that was as an organizer on campus at the University of Chicago with the College Democrats of America, organizing campuses across the city and across the country, whether that was my time on Congresswoman Underwood's reelection campaign during the pandemic, or my work at the State's Attorney's Office here in Cook County, or most recently, my time on the national analytics team of the Biden-Harris and then Harris-Walz campaigns. And what I've seen is we are in an era of politics where we can't just continue with the politics of the past over and over again. We need new voices coming in, and we especially need new voices of a younger generation. And so when my state rep decided to not run for re-election, I thought to myself, look, I've lived in this district since graduating from college. I've lived all across this district, first in Uptown, now more over in Ravenswood and Lincoln Square. That's sort of the broad breadth of the district, runs from the Wrigley rooftops up to Arcadia Terrace, from the Montrose Bird Sanctuary out to the river and between the cemeteries. And I thought to myself, look, I'm not seeing the kind of new politics, the kind of politics we all live in
Right.
and have to deal with in Springfield right now from very many people. Folks who know how hard it is to find an affordable place to rent, to live, folks who actually know that affordability matters, how what grocery prices are matter, what our energy bills are matter, and folks who are willing to look forward and say, what are the problems that are facing us now, whether that's the climate crisis, whether that's the impact of big tech on all different aspects of our society. I'm not seeing that sort of reality politics,
Right.
the politics of the things we're actually having to deal with right now. And so I thought to myself, hey, as I've said, have a lot of experience in politics. I've knocked a lot of doors all across this district. I've lived all across this district. And I just thought it was time for a change.
Absolutely. So, one thing you mentioned is that you were organizing on college campuses, which anybody that's done that knows that that is no small feat. It is difficult to organize on college campuses. How did that experience shape you into the kind of legislator that you want to be?
Mhm. Well, I think there are sort of two ways to start talking about this. And first, it's coalition building, right? It's looking at all of these different people who have all of these, or rather, all of these different groups that each have their own individual sort of central agendas, right? Whether that's standing up for environmental justice, or whether that's fighting for workers' rights and expanding, access to unions. That was a big point down at U Chicago when I was there with the Graduate Students Union, or it's folks who are focused on specific interest groups, right? And it's looking at figuring out what are the common areas we can bring folks in that way and work together to sort of advance our goals. Like, how can we move the College Dems chapter to go out and support, the formation of a graduate students union, or how can we use our, large organization to advance the issues of environmental justice that were happening on campus, right? And so I was very proud of some, lobbying I was able to do, bring folks together with administrators and, adding our voices in, that got the university to increase its emissions reductions goal, to sort of bring it up and actually sort of take our voice and do something very, very concrete on campus. The second point that you can do, and I'm sure anyone who's been to college or attempted to organize college, is figuring out how to bring more people into the process, right? Because wherever you are, there are always going to be people who are interested in political organizations and organizing sort of themselves, right? The question is, how do you bring in the people who care about politics, who care about, social good, but don't see it's worth getting involved in electoral politics or organizing, right? And that is something that obviously was tricky, but we tried to bring as many people as possible, and we brought them in through the issues they cared about, through connections to their hometowns or sort of similar areas to where they lived and where they grew up. And that's a big part of what I brought forward into this campaign, right? So a big part of this campaign is focused on those people who are younger, or maybe I'm 27, but really folks who are, broadly younger, and figuring out these people aren't, champing at the bit to get engaged in their Democratic board committee, right? Like, what is going to engage them and get them out and actually
Right.
interested in electing, folks who think like them and who share their perspectives, and also getting them out to hold Democrats accountable who we have to hold accountable.
Right. You touched on it a little bit, but you're 27. That would be young to hold public office. What do you think our generation is, and I say our because I'm
Mhm.
26. What do you think our generation sees or experiences that isn't showing up in Springfield yet? Like, where do you think that concrete evidence is that we're clearly not there?
Mhm. Well, I think the biggest focus is, what it's like to struggle with affordability in Chicago right now. And I'll say across the state as well, but obviously primarily this whole district's in Chicago, and I've lived in Chicago the last, oh God, since I was 18 now. And I think that's the really big focus. It's finding those housing options, right? It's finding places to rent. It's finding, having to go against a lot of people who are now moving to Chicago from across the city in our age cohort, because we've been out selling Chicago, saying how affordable it is, how great the city it is. And suddenly those people all want to move here, and we're just facing that same housing stock, right? Like I've had to move apartments before when my rent's been jacked up, and it's annoying. It's tricky. Thankfully, I have an aunt who is in Uptown, who has a spare room that I've used time and time again between leases. And she helped me right after I graduated from college as I was job hunting during the pandemic, which is another thing that I feel like most folks in Springfield didn't have to deal with. And it's really just those realities right now of rents going up, of groceries going up, grocery bills going up, energy bills going up, all these things that people talk about. But, when you're struggling to make ends meet, when you've had to, maybe take on a second job before a part-time job to try and, not have rent be 50% plus of your income, I don't think there's many folks in Springfield who have had to reckon with that, quite frankly.
Right. Right. I have talked about this in a couple of other episodes, but like the big buzzword right now is affordability.
Mm-hmm.
But that fails to capture the fact that affordability means something different to you and I than it does to our boomer parents. Because affordability to us is about rent prices, whereas affordability for our parents is about, insurance costs and stuff like that. Like, which is why it bothers me so much that affordability is a buzzword because it doesn't take into account that like it means so many different things to different people. And, you're right. There's our state electeds are talking a lot about affordability, but a lot of times I feel like they're talking about it in the sense of utility costs, which yes, that is important to us if you are paying rent or you own a home, but it's not the full picture of what people our age are experiencing.
Absolutely.
One thing you mentioned to me on our introductory phone call was that nobody else in this race brings what you do. I love the confidence, love it so much. Why do you think that combination that you are bringing to the table matters for this district in this moment?
Absolutely. And for a bit of additional context for the listeners at home and viewers who were not on that call, the thing that I think really sets me apart, it's my background in organizing combined with my background and experience in data and policy. So I've talked a bit already about my time organizing with the College Democrats, organizing young people and working on campaigns. That I feel like is really important, right? It's figuring out what values are driving people, what big, points of conversation are happening right now, and how we can actually sort of try and push those forward through organizing and activism. And the other side is my work in data and policy at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I worked there back before I joined the Harris campaign, or I guess then the Biden campaign. Their data and analytics team, which I believe has since been disbanded under the new state's attorney. But what we did there was look at how we can use the data that we are taking in, how we are using the data that the state and the county is taking in to, one, make sure that the policies we're passing at the state level are having their desired effects, right? Are actually making our communities safer and making our criminal justice system more fair, more actually just, right? And so that meant poring over the Illinois Criminal Code. It's quite a thick book, and they update it quite regularly. They keep passing laws. And I think it's my experience working there as well, actually figuring out, how did this law get passed? How can we use the levers that we have at the county to ensure that its implementation is actually being done in a way that is fair, that it advances our progressive values, right? And I think that combination is really important, knowing how to organize, how to get people together and actually help push legislators to pass good progressive legislation, but then actually to go in and say, okay, is this legislation that we were able to pass having its desired effect? Is the implementation working? And, that was borne out from, my undergrad and my graduate studies in public policy, also down at the University of Chicago at their Harris School, really, really focusing in on not only like, oh, this legislation sounds great, but is it working, right? And I think that is the part where so many people at implementation phase fall short, right? I like to say my whole adult life, the Democratic Party has loved an op-ed and a strongly worded letter, but we do occasionally get good legislation passed. But very often it just gets passed, it gets thrown out into the world, and then we don't actually go and make sure it's having those desired effects, right, in government. Like there are great organizations external to government, but we don't want to rely on some data scientist having a great idea to look into something to make sure it's actually working, right?
Right. And the other thing I will say is that, in my humble opinion, people that have a background in organizing that then go into political jobs as an elected representative are almost always more willing to hear people out and take the meetings with concerned people rather than people
Hmm.
that don't have that experience. Because you sitting on the other side of that desk are going to go, oh, I remember when I was in that position and I had to start beating down doors to get this
Hmm.
legislation that I wanted passed. I will take that meeting. So it's
Absolutely.
always so valuable when there's an organizer in office.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's how I've been trying to run this campaign as well. It's truly talking to as many people, as many organizations as possible. And I'm very strong in my progressive values, but I've taken meetings with, folks just to hear their side of the story who I may not agree with. And I've taken, whether that's, truly all levels of the political spectrum, all potential issues you could have talked about. I love to hear where people are at, but I still think it's so important that we are able to push forward, you know, our values when taking those into
Right. Well, and it's important to hear where people come from because it allows, I think, a greater breadth of conversation where you
it.
can say, like, I see your background and I understand that, that's how you were raised or that's, kind of the ideology that you come from. Well, here's this little piece in this legislation that I think
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
resonates with that background of yours that we just talked about.
Exactly.
So let's move on to some of your policies.
Sounds good.
Homelessness is
Hmm.
a deeply personal issue for you. After the 2024 election, you told me that you noticed that lawmakers weren't talking about cuts to homeless services. What is at stake, and what should Illinois be doing differently around
Hmm.
homeless policy?
Absolutely. Well, right off the bat, as you said, it's a very personal issue to me. My dad passed away a few years ago, and he struggled with homelessness and housing insecurity for a little bit of time before we were able to get him the help he needed. And that was born out of some mental health issues, some physical health issues. Homelessness isn't never 100% about housing. It's questions of mental health, of government prioritization of actual services that go towards helping folks, right? And yeah, as you said, when I was looking at the state legislator, when I was looking at, this race, even, when I was still considering getting in other candidates, I was looking to see, is anyone going to talk about homelessness, right? Is this something that is going to be pushed forward when at the time the last state budget had cut funding to those services? And I didn't really see anyone talk about it. And when I've been out knocking doors and talking to folks, it's a story that I will share. Oftentimes, oftentimes, people will, after hearing, the story of my dad, will share that, oh, like their sister went through something similar, or they had a friend who went through something similar, another family member. It's not something that is really top of mind to people to share, but I feel like in sort of sharing my family story, been able to make a lot of great connections and actually talk about those issues, right? Because wherever you live in this district, if you live in Uptown, if you live in Arcadia Terrace, like there are folks who are going through that very visibly.
Right.
And I think people don't see, the help necessary coming to them. I know the city is working on some, movement towards addressing this. I saw, the draft 5-year plan was released. I think that's a very interesting way to push forward. But I think we really need that strong perspective from the state as well. In chatting with other legislators, there are only a handful who really make, homelessness and housing insecurity a major part of their legislating. And so of 118 representatives, I think we need more than that, especially since over the last 5 or 6 years, the number of people going through housing insecurity, experiencing homelessness in
Right.
Chicago, let alone folks who are, you know, couch hopping or staying with family members, it's more than double. And I think we really need targeted action to the state right now. Additional funding to these services to try and help folks get through that.
When people are talking about the services that are being provided, like, what are you envisioning? Yes, you want to increase the funds, but what do those
Hmm.
funds go to help people that are
Hmm.
unhoused?
Hmm. I think there are a lot of different things. There are services that, again, receive state funding, whether that's organizations like the various community services around places that are able to actually provide beds, allowing them to just expand the level of physical services that are provided, right? Especially in the winter, as things get colder, you'll see instances, especially as you get further off into the northwest side, where there'll be signs on the shelters that say like, "Oh, we're out of
Right.
beds. You can come in, you can get warm, but we're out of actual beds for folks." And I think if we're able to expand again, just these physical, concrete, not literally concrete, but actual services, I think that'll go a long way, and that is how our state funding can come in. There are other points if we sort of expand out again from the direct issue of housing and more towards the issues of mental health. We see this funding for care teams and alternative response to folks who are experiencing mental health crises. Again, a lot of this is coming from the city level, but we really need strong partners at the state for enhanced funding to keep the spotlight shined on these services, such that if something is happening, people don't feel the immediate need to
Right.
call the police and then further escalate those situations. I know, like in the past, like the police have been the only option for me, and I'm sure for a lot of folks who see someone going through a bad or police or fire. But if we're able to have these, alternative response that are trained towards actual, help in this scenario, I think that'll be much more effective.
Right.
And we're seeing that
Absolutely.
in the pilot programs.
Right. Can you actually, speaking of pilot programs, can you give us a good example of one that you would want to, one, continue, but also like make it 10 times better should you get to
Mhm.
Springfield?
Absolutely. I think the care program is very helpful. This alternative crisis response. That right now, I think it's the hours of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. you can call, and that's the only time when you see a lot of these situations not obviously happening outside of those hours, those not even regular business hours. I think if we're able to get state funding to expand that program out, whether that is to more places across Chicago, to more hours across Chicago, or to work with the city to secure that funding, or into the suburbs or downstate, I think it would be really critical to help assuage this program at least a little bit, or this issue.
Right. So let's go back to affordability.
Yes.
As we talked about already, it touches literally every single part of life, from rent to groceries, utilities, medication costs,
Hmm.
literally everything. Where do you think the state legislature can actually make the biggest difference for people?
Well, I think right off the bat, there's been a lot of momentum recently um, around energy bills, right? And I know we talked about that as utilities as being something that cross cuts a little bit, but I think the biggest thing we're seeing is these impact of these new data centers that are coming in that are forcing you and I to basically bid against, big tech, Mark Zuckerberg, whoever you want to call the big bad of the week, to pay our own electricity bills, right? And this is because of a failure in Springfield to foresee the impact that these data centers would have on the power grid, right? And so I think that Springfield can push forward to ensure that these data centers, A, are not bidding against direct consumers, because that is under the purview of Springfield, but also to make sure that they are of the power they're pulling from the grid. That is power that, you know, should be brought in from renewable means, whether that's wind, whether that's solar, whether that's nuclear, whether that's all these different ways that we can, compel these data centers to, um, sorry, my roommate's just leaving. Uh, you know, bring more power onto the grid, such that should they leave at some point, that infrastructure will still be there, which will then play into environmental concerns and generation of better clean power. But in the short term, again, it shouldn't be driving up your and my electricity bills just to pay for generative AI slot machine.
Can you talk a little bit? This is something that I'm not even that aware of, but
Hmm.
as you talked about, data centers have become a huge thing in Illinois. Can you talk a
Hmm.
little bit more about that? Like, about where did they come from? Because it seems like in the
Hmm.
last year, we seem to have opened so many that our
Hmm.
utility bills are now so high for no
Hmm.
reason.
Totally. Well, again, it's born out of this AI boom or bubble, or however you'd like to call it, where you know in order to back end so many of these AI models, whether those are proprietary models, whether those are the public, the chat GPTs and the Claudes and all those, um, is to generate sort of, the back end computation necessary to allow for all this to continue. And whether or not you pro AI, anti AI, somewhere in the middle, I think we can agree that, their value add right now, it's, as far as I've heard, it's basically janitorial jobs that, keep those massive, massive data centers clean on the inside, which is great. And I'm all for more janitorial jobs. However, I think that the issue is that, you know, right now the economy is sort of 3 to 8 AI companies in a trench coat, right? So like all of the money that is sort of out and liquid is just being put into data centers, is being put into these massive new sort of infrastructure projects that serve to, let such and such person create disinformation on the internet. And I think that as we sort of look forward, as we think about like, again, the state of Illinois wants for the future, it's not one where, misinformation is free to create and, we're paying soon hundreds of dollars in electricity bills to basically subsidize it. And yeah, I think it's an important thing to look at. I think across the country, we're seeing sort of a rising wave of not discontent, but an acknowledgement that maybe this isn't something we want to be putting our building. Don't want to be focusing on. We don't want these data centers to be the new massive source
Right.
of pollution or of increasing energy bills as well, and just sort of the only thing we're building. We really want to focus in on how we can make the future better in a way that is more collaborative.
Oh, absolutely. But speaking
Mhm.
of building, we seem to
Yes,
be
of course.
building a whole heck of a lot of data centers and not a whole heck of a lot of housing.
So true.
Housing is another pressure point in
Mhm.
Illinois. How can Illinois add housing stock in a way that helps renters and first-time buyers without
Mhm.
pushing people out?
Totally. Again, housing is a big point here, and it's also something. It does help renters. It does help first-time buyers. But the more housing stock we can add, the more people who own property, the more people who then pay into the property tax base. And this sort of impacts folks who, may already own property, but are displeased by the rising costs of property taxes here in Cook County. If you think the more people who own property, the more that is able to then split out per capita, and effectively it lowers how much any individual is going to be needing to pay. Now, at the state level, there's two pieces of legislation right now. I believe it's HBs 1813 and 1814, which would drastically increase the housing stock across the state of Illinois. And those would legalize first ADUs, granny flats, coach houses, basically alternative dwelling units. That's what ADU stands for, on properties already. That would allow more folks to, have a separate living space. Prototypical granny flat is, you build an apartment above the garage you may have, such that an older member of your family could live there. The second one would legalize missing middle housing, which is basically 2 flats and 3 flats, which we're now starting to see built out more in the city. The city of Chicago has actually done great work to push these two key issue areas forward. There was the ADU legislation last year that passed City Council, as well as city currently building out some of that missing middle housing on city-owned land. However, at the state level, we need to legalize both of these to add more housing stock into the market, because the more there is, rents will come down, and we're able to allow renters to become buyers, and folks who may not even afford to rent right now, folks who may still be living with family, to get out and actually start their own
Do
lives
you mean
should they so
me?
desire.
Do you mean me who lives with my
Should they
mom
so
because I can't
should they
because I
so
can't
desire?
afford it?
Yeah. I mean, hey, that's one of those big things. As I said, during the pandemic, I lived with my aunt in her spare room for a while, because that was, you know, if you can't find a job and the job market is still not fully recovered from COVID, or, if you can't find a place you can afford, you're not, you're going to be in those situations where, you're stuck and you're saving up money, which is great,
Right.
but, you don't have
I've
that sort of freedom of movement, right?
Right. I've told this story probably like 3 times now, so sorry if anybody's sick of it. But I went to DePaul for college, so I lived in Lincoln Park.
Yeah.
My senior year, which was 2021 to 2022, I rented an apartment across from the Taco Bell on Armitage,
Oh,
right
yeah.
by the Armitage train stop. You know the place above the Keels, actually, is where it was.
Oh,
I
very nice.
rented it for $2,000 per month. I recently, over the summer, was like, let me see if I can afford to rent something in the city. My apartment was back on the market, and I said, oh, perfect. Like, I'd love to live there again. It was so fun, like such a great spot. I click on the rent. It was $3,200. Not
Oh
a
my
single
God.
update has been made. I said, great. Perfect. I could have afforded it at $2,000. At $3,200?
Hmm.
Over what, 3 years at that point?
That's crazy.
It was insane. Like,
Mhm.
it's not to pat Greg Abbott on the back, but Texas's cost of living has gone down so much because they
Mhm.
are building, building, building.
Mhm.
There's no
I
reason
do.
that we can't do
Mhm.
it here.
Absolutely. I do find myself in that same situation where I say I don't want to give Texas its flowers, but at the state level, the work they've been doing to expand housing stock in some of
Right.
their inner ring or their smaller cities has been really really helpful, and I think that is a model we should try and follow to some degree in Illinois.
Right. Right. Because,
Hmm.
the end goal would be for, cost of living and housing to go down, which
Hmm.
I would be greatly appreciative of because I don't want to live in my mom's house forever.
Hmm. And absolutely. And the crazy thing is, and now that first having talked about the specific legislation that's happening right now, if we zoom out talking about Texas again, to the political implications of housing, which is always tricky. And I think housing intersects with everything. If you look at the census estimates in 2030, when the next census will come around, which is closer than the last one, which is crazy to say, top wise. Right now, Illinois is on track to lose 2 congressional seats and therefore 2 electoral
Mm-hmm.
votes because
Don't remind
of the
me.
lack because of the lack of housing availability. And where are those congressional votes going? They're going to go to Florida. They're going to go to Texas. They're going to go to Idaho. They're going to go to states that we cannot trust will be electing Democrats moving forward, right? Illinois, we, as I was saying earlier on this, I almost said this call. I'm so used to video chat. People want to move to Chicago. People of our age want to move to Chicago because we've talked up, maybe not this time of year, but we've talked up the weather, we've talked up the beaches, we've talked up the low cost of living. Which the crazy thing is, you talked about your apartment now, your old apartment now renting for $3,200. I had an old college classmate of mine just moved back from New York because he and his partner were paying $5,000 for a 1 bed in New York. And they moved back to Chicago and they found it's like a 2 bed for 3,500. And they're like, oh, it's a deal. And then afterwards, I say, no, you paying way too much.
Perception is
Hmm.
everything because right after I lived in that $2,000 a month apartment, it
Hmm.
was 2 bed, 1 bath, and it had a balcony.
Hmm.
That was
Oh,
$2,000. I moved to DC. And when I
yeah,
moved to DC, I lived far out of like like I didn't live in a like desirable neighborhood. I lived
sure.
far in like the northeast corner of DC. Like it was very
Mm.
suburban looking. And I rented an apartment for I think all in it was 1 bed, 1 bath, and it was $2,300. And I remember being like, holy shit, like that's so expensive. And then I moved back
Yeah,
here,
no,
looked at the rent prices, and I was like, are you joking? Say
yeah, no,
say
I'm very,
I'm on a hidden camera show right now.
it's not hidden. It's right there. But yeah, no, I'm very thankful, grateful for where I'm living right now. My roommate, as I said, just left vaguely off stage left, but we have a decent rent. Ravenswood's great. Everyone should move up here, and that's my pitch, of course, for the beautiful 13th district.
Oh god, it's always disappointing when I open up apartments.com, like their app, and
Hmm.
I like put in my like price range and all that stuff, and then I look at the map and there's a big empty space in Lincoln Park. I go, perfect. Sounds good. I lived there for 4
Hmm.
years, never had a problem, and now I'm priced out.
Hmm.
That's the way the cookie crumbles.
Very true.
So let's talk about
Yes. Mhm.
big tech.
Big
Big,
tech.
big unfortunate tech. It often feels untouchable and like we'll never rein it in. But you have argued that states still have power. What should Illinois be doing, especially around data privacy and AI?
A lot. And I think Illinois has, we have the history of tech regulation that at times it seemed lucky we got into, and at times it's clear roadblocks came up because of interference by these companies, right? If you look at uh, the Biometric Information Privacy Act, BIPA, which is the reason all those years ago people were, getting that money from the Google lawsuits and the Snapchat lawsuits
Right.
and this and that. And since Since then, legislation's been passed that rolled it back a little bit. But that was actually passed in like 2008, right? Like way before these downstream implications sort of came about. And I think that truly we still have a window, small window, to work on AI regulation.
Just to be clear, the window's like it's closing, right?
It's definitely closing. It's
Okay.
definitely closing. I've definitely been on this shtick for a while. I used to write a blog actually back in like 2021, 2022 on how states were attempting to regulate AI. And then ChatGPT dropped and it
Wow,
became way
really
too much to talk about.
ahead
Like
of your
way
time on that one.
it's been a hobby horse of mine for a while. And I think that because I knew that the window was there to work on it, right? And back then it was all about self-driving cars and um, government use of AI. And I think there's still work that can be done in that similar vein, a little out of the public eye. And there are I guess, three things I'd like to talk about here. The first is, of course, data privacy. And I think if we build upon UNDIPA and all on top of other legislation that had been passed in the past, we can and must protect the data privacy of certain folks. And this is actually something I talked about recently when I was meeting with Personal PAC. They're a major reproductive rights and abortion health care group in Illinois. I'm very happy to have their endorsement in this race. And the key thing when it comes to reproductive rights in Illinois, and obviously we have a great governor and we have great legislature when it comes to protecting access to abortion. And because of that, we've become somewhat of an island in the Midwest, even in the middle of the country, when it comes to abortion access, which means that a lot of folks are coming into Illinois from other states that are far more hostile to those rights. And we have to make sure that those people who are coming in, their data is protected, right? And we've seen some moves by the Secretary of State's office, for instance, when it comes to tracking of license plates of folks who drive in and then drive to clinics that provide these services. And we have to make sure also that their phones, their other ways that we can track them, that data isn't immediately going out to the Palantirs of the world into a hostile federal government and then back out into these red states. And I think that can be done with legislation around geotargeting. That can be done with legislation around geofencing and all these other methods that folks use to track people right now, oftentimes to just try and sell them things. But again, with the impact that big tech has in the federal government right now, the influence it has, we're seeing a lot more potential negative interactions, as we've seen these reports of ICE being able to track protesters, being able to track folks who are protesters through their cell phones, which there's a lot of great reporting on that. I'd go read that. I can speak to that fully. That is the type of work we should be passing in Springfield to protect folks who are coming to seek reproductive health care, folks who are exercising their First Amendment rights, folks who are organizing, standing up against ICE and Trump's, border patrol agents who are doing terrible, terrible things across this country. And we must be standing against them. And it's your right to protest a fascist federal government without being put on lists because of your phone, right? So data privacy, that's number one. Number two is AI as a labor issue. And I think this is a really key point. And there are sort of, again, two forks of this. First, it's the impact that generative AI is having on creative workers, whether that's artists or musicians or folks who work in entertainment broadly. I think we need protections in place for those workers against automation, against the impact of AI. And I've had a chance to chat with some folks from the American Federation of Musicians and some of the other entertainers unions who are very focused on this right now and thinking about how the best way to legislate at the state level to protect those folks. And I think that's something we need to look at. On the other side of the labor concerns is folks who operate in the gig economy, who are at risk of algorithmic pricing and algorithmic wage discrimination, really making sure that those folks are getting the labor protections they need and are treated as workers. I've been very impressed and inspired by the organizing done by rideshare drivers in Illinois right now, working with SEIU, working with other major unions to try and get their recognition as workers is really, really critical. And looking at how AI and tech interacts with that is a critical piece of that. Thirdly, and the thing that I think Springfield can do very clearly is ensure that as AI permeates its way into government work, and again, I think AI is a tool, it's perfectly fine. It can serve its certain purposes, but making sure
Right.
that through its work in government, we're keeping out as much, generative slop as possible. We're making sure that must always be, that human in the loop that is making sure that all these decisions have an actual person behind them, right? And making sure that we're legislating such that, we're not making major government decisions based out of, an AI black box.
I had this woman on that is an AI expert, and she writes and works in the space of making sure that AI use in like the nonprofit and like mission driven work is ethical. And one of her solutions was actually reskilling. So implementing AI, but then her solution was kind of forcing states or having states enforce rules that say if you're going to implement AI in your company, you have to reskill at least like X% of your workers to do a different kind of work so that you're not firing
Mm.
them. To you, does that sound like something that could work in Illinois?
I think so. I think it depends on obviously the use cases of AI, right? So that's one of those tricky things where it's hard to paint with a broad brush when it comes to how
Right.
people are implementing this in their particular companies, because oftentimes it's just yeah. I think that could be something that could be helpful, especially if it's a case where you know your use of AI would allow you to cut from 15 people performing a role to 5 people for performing a
Right.
role, as
Yeah, and
opposed to
that's the
large scale
example that
automation.
she
Yep.
gave.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was the example that she gave was that like you bring an AI and instead of needing 10 you need 9. So what do you do with that
Hmm.
extra person? Reskill them,
Yeah,
make
no,
them do
I
something
think.
else that's better.
Hmm. I think reskilling is a very helpful way to look at
Right.
that. Hmm.
So based on your response, you have taken a more aggressive stance on AI than many lawmakers have at this point. It feels like so many people are still running around like their head's been cut off and they don't know how to respond
Hmm.
to what is becoming a very growing crisis. What, and you also mentioned the window closing. If that window closes, what worries you the most about the potential outcomes?
I think it is largely rooted in those data privacy concerns, right? I think my largest concern with AI and with tech broadly is its use by bad actors to sort of influence people and push them in ways that they perhaps wouldn't have done already. I think, your most optimistic bad actor scenario is just, people using AI to convince people to buy things, through advertising, buy things they may not need. But then, and I already talked a little bit about this earlier, it's this impact of disinformation and misinformation.
Right.
What used to be, oh, like maybe you're good enough at Photoshop to convince someone that something happened. Misinformation is now free, basically, to make and to distribute and to pose any way possible. And you'll see even if you go on Facebook now, it's a lot of this misinformation. It's really unclear why it's there. It's degrading trust in media, trust in what your own eyes can see. If it's oh, you decided to whip something up about how uh, Patrick Mahomes was moved by a tearful rendition of a 5-year-old Star Spangled Banner singing.
Right.
Why, right? But it looks fairly real, and if you put a passing glance at it, or folks who may be inclined to just not think about these things, it's going to degrade that sort of trust in anything you see online. And I think there should be a healthy degree of distrust in anything you see online. However, yeah, I don't see the point in this destruction of trust. And I think that is
Right.
sort of the main downstream effect that I'm worried about seeing.
Right. And people are not as cautious about their personal information as they should be. Like
Hmm.
I think the big one that people think about, especially people that are involved in the political space, is when you donate to a candidate and then all of a sudden next year you have 10 different candidates texting you and you're like, who the hell
Yep.
who the hell are you? It's
Mm-hmm.
because the original candidate you donated to sold their donor rolls to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
People get annoyed by that, but then they don't get
Yeah, they do.
annoyed by like just putting in their information to a period tracking app that is probably going to sell your information back to Palantir, or on Twitter, where Elon Musk literally owns it. You think he's not keeping track of that information? It's people aren't concerned enough in the areas that they actually need to be concerned about.
That's true. That's very true.
It's frustrating. AI scares me so bad. Every time I see like those AI videos, like you talked about on social media, I'm like, what is going on? Like my boyfriend posted one on his story, like true, like genuinely, like thought it was real, and I had to text him and be like, you know that I was like, that's AI. So no, it's not. I said, yeah, it is.
Unfortunately, it is.
No, he goes, how do you know? I'm like, why am I like? I don't know why I know, but like like the limb didn't move the right way. Something moved in a fashion that I didn't look right. Like it is AI, and people don't recognize it.
And no, that's absolutely true. And I think again, the misinformation, the disinformation is weird and pointless, and again, a major issue. But I think coming back to your point of like the period tracking app, for instance, people give away so much of their data and so much of their health data as well. And I think that's why I'm very glad out of convenience. And oftentimes it's just, it's agreeing to a terms and conditions that you're never going to read through some piece of technology, whether that's wearable tech or some app or something, where you don't think about where the data is going. And this is information that, again, in the best case scenario is just going to be used to sell you something. And the worst case scenario is going to be used to, actively, put things upon you that you would never want.
I was going to go even darker than that and say knock on your door and demand things from you. But yes, we'll keep
hopefully not. Hopefully not. But again, that is why we have to move on this legislation.
Right.
And why we have
absolutely.
to work on this. Yeah. We could talk about this all day, but there's
I'm
a lot
just
of
so intrigued by like
there.
Right. I'm so intrigued by like the data privacy, and like again, we're seeing all these articles come out about like the selling of the social security data and like all the data tracking that Musk did while Doge was still a thing, and like nothing. It's been a year and nothing seems to have come of it. I'm like, where are you hiding my data? Two, what are you doing with it?
The other shoe's gonna drop.
Oh, it will. I'm not sure when, but I'm sure it will. So let's move on to some closing thoughts and remarks. Get a little bit more hopeful now that we've kind of dug ourselves into a deep dark hole around AI.
There is hope out there. There is hope out there.
Well, let's get into it. So politics can feel very stagnant, discouraging. It can make you feel down in the dumps. What keeps you hopeful enough to run, especially in a moment when trust in government is so low?
No, I think that is a question I have to ask myself a lot and sort of turn to a lot, because when I speak with folks, I'll say my whole adult life, my whole work, in 95% of my work in politics has been in this Trump era of politics, where Republicans do whatever they want with no rhyme or reason, run roughshod over any institution they would like, and democratic values and progressive values either end in a strongly worded letter or an op-ed, or become policy, but then the implementation of it sort of goes a bit off the rails. And that's part of, again, why I'm running, is we need a new generation's perspective, right? One that isn't, I didn't grow up with, I like to say, the capital H hope of the Obama era, right? Like none of that is going around. Like, don't get me wrong, I love to go back and watch The West Wing every now and again, and I know that was pre-Obama era. But like that era of politics really is gone. And so what gives me hope is really a lot of this upswell of movement, especially now after the last presidential election, of folks who are outside of politics but are getting involved, right? It's these folks who are coming together to work on ICE watches and on school patrols. And as I'm knocking doors and talking to people, very often, I'll see, even with, ICE, the ICE presence a little less in Chicago, before it hopefully doesn't, but very likely will come up again, bowls of whistles and of information on front porches, right? And in apartments. And the number of people who come out to actually help with these school patrols, right? I live right by Ravenswood Elementary. I've been out to theirs a few times when there was the first big ICE surge last autumn. And there were so many people who'd show up. You'd get to like you know, 5 or 6 blocks away from the school and like as far out as possible with multiple people to a corner, just keeping an eye to try and keep our community safe. And these aren't folks who, you know, again, are deeply involved with the Democratic ward committees or these
Right.
institutions that already exist. You have this groundswell of people who are, just members of their community, but know that politics isn't something that we can just disregard anymore. This is something that is so concretely having an impact on our lives that, it's just so inspiring to see all of the folks who are, coming up out of the, you know, anywhere to try
Right.
and keep our community safe. I think that's
Right.
really, really, really helpful.
Right. Well, it's for me, it's the same thing. Like, I've been so inspired by just the like liberal moms of the northwest suburbs, and book club today. We're reading like a book about like hope in hard times, like
Hmm.
stuff like that, and like building those small pieces of community truly mean the most when every time you pick up your phone, you want to blow
Hmm.
your brains out because there's
Oh no,
some new
definitely. But yeah.
breaking news. Well,
Hmm.
sorry, me. I want to blow my brains out every
Hmm.
time I pick up my phone.
Yeah, no, everything's going bad, but it really is community that's keeping us together, right?
Right.
And that's why, I say in my campaign, I'm trying to bring in folks who are care about politics and care about social change, but are outside of that political institution. And there's such this groundswell now of folks like that, but also folks who are still waiting for just that one extra knock on their door, that one extra, person asking them, "Hey, are you going to get involved in this?" And I've seen a ton of those. I've had a lot of those conversations at the
Right.
doors, whether that's and people oftentimes just need to be asked, right? And that's why, whenever I'm out
Right.
knocking doors, I make sure to ask folks if they have the number for ICER's Family Support Network hotline. Making sure they have that information, I think, is so critical to try, use a little bit of what I'm doing to try and extend that, community building as well.
Right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So, one last question. If voters in the 13th district remember one thing about why you are running for the 13th House district, what do you
Lucky
want it to
13.
be?
Absolutely. Well, I have so many things, but look, I think the main thing is look, we have enough lawyers and lobbyists in Springfield already. If we want to try and actually advance progressive values, we need folks who can provide a new perspective, a new generation's perspective, the perspective of someone who we've talked about this has both in organizing and in policy, who can actually drive forward concrete policies that make people's lives better. And I don't think we're going to do that with just more candidates of the past. I think we need newer voices. We really strongly think we need younger voices in our politics. And I would love the opportunity to represent all of these beautiful neighborhoods down in Springfield, in the 13th district.
Well, speaking of those neighborhoods, I got one more softball question for you.
Yes,
Hypothetically, I'm
hypothetically.
coming down to the 13th district to get some dinner.
Hmm.
I need a
Oh,
rec.
okay.
I need a restaurant recommendation. What's your go-to?
Oh my, I go to. There are of course so many that are great,
It
which is
is
very
it
true.
is the city of Chicago.
It is the city of Chicago. Is it still restaurant week too?
Oh
There
yeah, it
are
might be.
yes. I think one of the first restaurant weeks I did in Chicago, I did come up to Demira. It's an Ethiopian spot, Lawrence and
Okay.
Broadway. Very, very good. Right smack dab in the middle of 13th district. Would highly recommend.
Okay.
Demira is great. Summer barbecue. I'm a sucker for the Peking duck. It's another great spot. Anywhere in Argyle is great. Um, Further out west, Bien Mesabe, I got to talk about. I
Okay.
believe it's primarily an arepa place, but very, very solid. And afterwards, there are roughly 1 billion great dive bars and other great spots. The Green Mill has to be talked about across the street from Demira. It's a great one-two punch. Famous old jazz club.
Love
So,
it.
mhm.
What if I wanted to get breakfast?
Breakfast. Oh, I
What's
think
your like went out, I was
Tweet
at
is
one of
great.
the dive oh,
Mhm.
wait, where?
Tweet. Um,
Tweet? Okay.
yes, it's next to Big Chicks, which is one of the I don't know if I'd call it a dive bar, but it's a staple. It's cash only. Up in sort of the line
Love it.
between Edgewater and Uptown.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We had our campaign holiday party there. Very much recommend. Great spot. Yeah, Tweet's great for breakfast. Where else? Oh, anywhere. Come on, come on, come down. I'll give you the tour. But there are so many great spots.
I love asking whenever I interview a candidate, especially the
Mhm.
ones from out of state. I love to ask this question because I feel like I get
Mhm.
so many good restaurant recommendations.
I will keep saying there are so many great places, but I hope the
Yes.
fact that I gave the fact that I gave several is hopefully a point
Listen,
in my
I
favor.
appreciate it because sometimes I get people on here and they're like, "Oh, we have great Italian spots," and I'm like,
Name
I
that.
understand you don't want to name
Mhm.
drop, but like, come on,
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
coming. I'm coming.
Yeah.
I need the name
Mhm.
of a place.
Mhm. Caro is
I
great.
appreciate it.
I think Caro is in district. It's in Andersonville. It's near.
It's an okay.
It's on the line.
We're
It
pushing.
might be
Yeah,
just
we're
like the
pushing the
wrong
limits.
side of the
Okay.
street, but um, again, it's when you're running to represent a district that's Uptown, Andersonville, Lincoln Square, all the way down into chunks of Lakeview. Like you're gonna get a ton of
Oh
great.
yeah,
Ravenswood,
you
of course,
have
where I am right now.
right. There's,
Yeah,
I mean, again, it's the city of Chicago. There's a restaurant every like what 60 feet probably.
exactly. Yeah. And a couple of the great breweries too. We're right in
Oh
that
yeah.
brewery row on Ravenswood. So shout out.
All right. Well, that is all I have for you. Is there anything else that you feel like I might have missed?
No, I think that's. I appreciate the long conversation, Paige.
Of
I
course.
think if there's one thing left outstanding, I would say, I think how important it is that we keep fighting for a lot of the advances we've seen when it comes to, again, reproductive rights and LGBTQ
Yep.
plus rights in Illinois. I think we need to make sure that we are standing against the federal government's attacks on trans kids, especially, and especially as that comes out to healthcare in our state, whether that's pre-compliance with hospitals, in taking away care, and making sure that at the state level we're providing both gender affirming and life saving care as needed for these folks, and more broadly saying that we need to address a lot of the issues we're seeing in healthcare from um, private ownership, whether that's the closure of Weiss Hospital or other impacts that private healthcare is having on the district. Those are really key ones. But no, beyond that, we've talked about affordability, we've talked about housing, we've talked about ICE, and how much we need to stand against ICE and Customs and
Yep.
Border Patrol in the community. And there's still great legislation that can be done. We did pass some great legislation towards the end of last year to keep ICE out of more spaces. But I think whoever is in Springfield next year from all of the districts will need to push forward opening more avenues of legal recourse against ICE to protect our communities directly and to
Right.
potentially even provide, that legal counsel to families who are going through some of those major issues. Right. Last story before I head off, because I'm sure you have other things to do. Is back when I was in August when I was petitioning, I met a woman up on California on the western side of this district. And we chatted for a little bit. Her English wasn't very good. She pulled her daughter down from downstairs. And we ended up chatting about ICE and about our, how we can protect immigrant communities, queer communities, and all these things. And I went on my way afterwards after a nice chat. And her daughter ended up messaging me a couple weeks later to say that her mom and her stepdad had both been abducted by ICE. And she didn't know what to do. It was her and her stepbrother, I believe, were sort of left in the lurch because not only did they have to figure out how to try and get their parents back, but then they're also on the hook for, paying the renter mortgage and paying the grocery bills and paying those massive legal fees that are going to come out of this. And, I was able to connect her with ICER, with her alderman, with a lot of these other folks who were able to help a bit more. And I believe she recently was able to get back
Oh, thank
in contact
God.
with her mom. But like just seeing what our neighbors have to go through, our community members,
Right.
it's terrible. And if at the state level we can help provide maybe some money for those legal fees, or making sure that these families that are left in the lurch have the support they need, I think is really important as well to do. But that is
Right.
what I would like to leave on. I think that's a
Right.
really critical piece
Right.
there.
I
But,
am very eager. As I said at the top of the episode, there's so many great people running. And again, we're in Illinois. That's unfortunately the only state level politics that I'm like deeply involved in. But there are some
mhm,
very exciting people running here in Illinois. And I'm very excited for that first session in
mhm.
2027 to see what we can do and
No, and
what
I think
happens.
there's a lot we can
Yeah,
do.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I will have your campaign website, donation link, social media in
Mhm.
the show notes so everyone can
Here,
go
wherever
and
it may be.
Everyone can go and ridgefor13.com. There you have it. So everyone can go and look at that, donate to, do what they would like to do with that. But yeah, this is coming out on March 2nd, which means that everywhere in Illinois, early voting is open.
Yes. So on March 2nd, which is right now for me, a little in the future, but hopefully for the listeners right now, early voting is open in the ward super sites. So every ward has a location to vote. For me in the 47th ward, that'll be Wells Park over on Sunnyside. I can't list all of them off the top of my head. However, I believe if you go to chicagoelections.gov, you'll be able to go see where they are. And if you go to my website, ridgefor13.com, by the time this comes out, there will also be information on your local ward super site. You do not have to go to your own ward super site if there's one closer to where you work, or if you want to go to the downtown one. Those are all options. You give your address and they'll give you the correct ballot. But yeah, that's how you do it.
And if you live in the suburbs, I think it's a little different. Yeah, do not go to chicagoelections.gov. You will not be able to vote in the city of Chicago, but we do have the same thing where it's like super sites that you can only go to certain ones. So I think that's on the like illinoiselections.gov or something like that. I'll find the link and that'll be in the show notes.
I won't guess.
Something like that, and you can find the early voting locations. Otherwise, day of voting, March 17th. At your
St. Patrick's Day.
At the place that St. Patrick's Day, at the place that you normally would vote at. But that is it. Thank you so much, Ridge.
Incredible. Yeah, Paige, thank you so much. Thank you to the listeners for listening. It's been a very wide-ranging conversation, but very happy to share my thoughts and the importance of bringing, as I said, a new generation's voice down to Springfield. So thanks so much.
Of course, yeah. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. And thank you for sitting through all of these episodes of Illinois candidates. It's really just been a great experience for me, at least, to see just the variety of ideas that are running across the state and at different levels of government, which has been super exciting. So this is officially the last Illinois candidate before the primaries happen, which, as Ridge mentioned in his episode, regular voting is starting tomorrow. So get out there and vote. Make sure you are voting for the future that you want to see. And we will see which way the cookie crumbles. But seriously, thank you so much to Ridge for coming on. He is so well spoken. And as I say every time that I have a young person on, it's so interesting to see the way that my path has completely diverged from young people running for office, the way those two paths have just gone two separate ways. And it's great to hear how young people are really stepping up to the challenge that this moment demands. But yeah, just remember this month we are doing 3 guest episodes because I am traveling and it just is not fit to do a solo episode for next week. So we will have another guest episode next week. And yeah, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information, especially if they live in Illinois' House District 13. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and remember to get out and vote in the Illinois primaries by March 17th. I will see you guys next week.